He wasn't supposed to feel anything ever again, but the dog refused to accept that as the ending. The room is too quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your ears until it feels like pressure, like something unspoken pressing against your chest. And in the center of it lies Noah Carter, 10 years old, small for his age, pale beneath the sterile hospital lights that wash everything in a colorless glow, his body still, too still, as if time forgot him here. Machines blink softly beside him, steady, indifferent, their rhythm the only proof that something inside him is still trying, still holding on, even if the world outside has already begun to move past him. The air smells faintly of antiseptic and plastic, a cold, clinical scent that never quite leaves, clinging to everything, even hope, even memory, and beyond the glass door nurses pass by with quiet steps, their voices low, practiced, careful not to disturb a silence that has already taken too much. Noah doesn't look at them, doesn't look at anything. His eyes remain fixed somewhere distant, somewhere unreachable, like he's watching a life he can no longer step into, like he's standing outside himself and doesn't know how to come back. 42 days, that's what the chart says, 42 days since the accident, since everything changed in a single moment no one can rewind, and the doctors have already said the words they always say when they've run out of answers. Words that sound gentle but land heavy, final, words like unlikely and permanent and adjustment, words that close doors quietly so no one hears them lock. His mother sits in the corner, hands folded too tightly in her lap, eyes red but dry now, because even grief gets tired after a while. Even tears run out when nothing changes, and she watches him the way people watch sunsets they know they can't stop, memorizing something that feels like it's already gone. And then there's the door, the one that stays closed most of the day, until it opens just enough for something unexpected to slip through, something that doesn't belong to this place of rules and schedules and careful voices, something with fur the color of earth and shadow, something that moves with a quiet certainty that doesn't ask permission. Rex doesn't rush in, doesn't bark, doesn't draw attention to himself. He simply steps forward, one paw at a time, his nails clicking softly against the polished floor, his amber eyes scanning the room with a calm that feels almost deliberate, almost knowing. And for a moment no one notices him except the man standing just behind, Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes, broad-shouldered, still in uniform though it's worn softer now. His right sleeve pushed just enough to reveal ink against skin, the faint outline of a dog etched into his forearm, a mark of something he doesn't explain anymore. Rex, he says quietly, not a command, just a word, but the dog doesn't look back, doesn't wait, because whatever brought him here isn't something that answers to orders. He passes the other beds, the other patients, the other lives paused in different ways, and he doesn't stop, not once, until he reaches Noah, and then he does something strange, something simple, something no one in the room can quite explain later when they try. He sits. Not beside the chair, not near the foot of the bed like he was trained to, but right at Noah's side, close enough that his breath stirs the edge of the blanket, close enough that the warmth of him reaches a body that hasn't felt much of anything at all. Daniel shifts slightly, watching, his brow tightening just a fraction, because Rex was never this still, never this focused without reason. And there's a memory there, something from another place, another time, where silence like this meant something was about to change. The nurse steps forward, hesitant, ready to correct, to redirect, to maintain the order that keeps everything predictable. But she stops when she sees the dog's eyes, steady, unblinking, locked not on the room, not on the people, but on Noah, as if he's waiting, as if he's listening for something no one else can hear. Minutes pass, or maybe it's seconds. It's hard to tell in a room where time stretches and folds in strange ways, and nothing happens, not at first. Just the same quiet, the same stillness, the same distance that has defined every moment since that day. But Rex doesn't move, doesn't shift, doesn't look away. And there's something about that, something stubborn, something patient, something that refuses to leave even when there's no sign, no promise, no reason to stay. And Daniel exhales slowly, almost under his breath. What do you see, boy? Because he's seen this before, in different forms, in different places, where instincts meant the difference between giving up and holding on, where something unseen could change everything without warning. The light outside shifts just slightly, late afternoon slipping toward evening, casting longer shadows across the floor, and in that quiet, in that fragile space between nothing and something, the dog lowers his head, just a little, just enough that it rests near Noah's hand, not touching, not yet, just waiting, as if the world is holding its breath along with him. The night it happened did not feel like a moment that would divide a life into before and after. It felt ordinary in the way quiet disasters often do, wrapped in routine, hidden beneath small, forgettable details like the soft hum of tires on asphalt and the faint glow of streetlights stretching in long lines across the windshield. Noah had been in the back seat, leaning his head against the cool glass, tracing invisible patterns with his finger as the city passed by in blurred reflections. His mother speaking softly on the phone about something that no longer mattered, something that dissolved the second everything changed, and even now, weeks later, the memory does not come to him as a clear sequence but as fragments, pieces that refuse to fit together, a sound, a shift, a sudden silence where sound should have been, like the world itself paused and forgot how to continue. The hospital became his world after that, not all at once, but slowly, like a tide rising without warning, until there was nothing left of the life he knew except echoes that visited in the quiet hours, echoes of running footsteps on hardwood floors, of laughter carried through open windows, of a boy who did not think about movement because movement was simply there, constant, effortless, a language his body spoke without asking permission. Now, everything requires permission, everything requires effort, and even then, most things do not answer. The doctors speak in careful tones, their words measured, their expressions trained to hold steady no matter what they see. But there are moments when the truth slips through the edges, in the way they hesitate before entering the room, in the way they glance at the chart before looking at Noah, as if the paper holds more certainty than the boy himself. Spinal cord injury, one of them had said early on, the phrase heavy, clinical, final, followed by explanations that filled the air but did not reach him, percentages and possibilities and timelines that stretched into something abstract, something distant, something that belonged to other people, not to a 10-year-old who only understood that his legs did not listen anymore. Therapy began quickly, because that is what you do when there is still a chance. You try, you push, you repeat. You believe in progress even when it is invisible, even when it feels like you are asking the impossible to become ordinary again. But Noah did not respond the way they hoped, not because he could not, but because something inside him had stepped back, had retreated to a place where effort felt meaningless, where trying only reminded him of what he had lost. The therapists brought tools, exercises, encouragement, voices that stayed bright even when the room did not. But Noah remained still, his eyes distant, his body uncooperative in a way that no amount of instruction could change, and over time, the sessions grew quieter, shorter, less certain, until they became something that happened around him instead of with him. His mother tried to fill the silence, reading to him, telling stories, holding his hand as if touch alone could bridge the gap between who he was and who he had become. But even her voice began to carry a tremor she could not hide, a question she did not dare to ask out loud. How long do you wait for something to come back when it may never return? Outside the room, life continued in ways that felt almost unfair, nurses laughing softly at the station, carts rolling down hallways, the world moving forward with a rhythm that did not include him, and inside, time stretched thin, each day blending into the next until they lost their names, until morning and evening became indistinguishable except for the changing light that slipped through the blinds and painted slow patterns across the floor. And yet, something shifted the day the dog arrived, though no one could say exactly when, because it did not come with noise or announcement. It came quietly, like a breath taken after holding it too long, like a presence that did not demand attention but changed the air simply by existing. Rex returned the next morning, and the morning after that, always the same, always steady, walking in beside Daniel with that same quiet purpose, ignoring the routine, the rules, the expectations, and going straight to Noah as if there were no other place he needed to be. He did not perform, did not respond to commands the way therapy dogs were meant to. He did not fetch or demonstrate or entertain. He simply stayed, lying beside the bed for hours, his body relaxed but his attention unwavering, as if he were guarding something fragile, something not yet visible but worth protecting all the same. Daniel watched from a distance at first, arms crossed, expression unreadable, because there was something familiar in the way Rex behaved, something that reached back to memories he did not often revisit, places where instinct mattered more than instruction, where you trusted what you could not explain because it had proven itself before. "He is not like the others," a nurse whispered once, half concerned, half curious, and Daniel nodded slightly, not in agreement, but in recognition, because he had known that long before this room, long before this boy, long before the quiet that now held them all in place. Days passed, and still, Noah did not speak, did not move, did not acknowledge the presence beside him in any way that anyone could measure. But Rex did not leave, not even when gently urged, not even when food was placed elsewhere, not even when the schedule demanded it. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the room began to feel different, not brighter, not louder, but less empty, as if something had taken root in the silence, something patient, something waiting for the right moment to be seen. By the fourth day, people in the ward began to notice that the dog was not visiting the boy, he was choosing him. And there is a difference that cannot be explained in charts or schedules, a difference that settles into a room the way warmth settles into cold hands, slow and undeniable. Rex no longer waited for Daniel to give direction. He moved ahead of him, pacing just enough to reach the door first, pausing only when it opened, then stepping inside with that same quiet certainty, his body, language calm but anchored, as if every step was guided by something deeper than training. The nurses stopped trying to redirect him, not because they had been told to, but because something in his presence made interruption feel wrong, like speaking during a prayer you did not fully understand but knew you should not break. Daniel noticed it too, the shift in how people moved around the dog, how voices softened when he entered, how even the steady rhythm of machines seemed to fall into the background when Rex settled beside the bed, and it reminded him of another time, another place, where silence like that meant something was unfolding beneath the surface, something you trusted without needing proof. "You found your post, didn't you?" he murmured one morning, his voice low, almost private, as Rex lowered himself into position beside Noah's arm, close enough that the boy could feel the faint rise and fall of breath even if he did not respond to it. And Daniel's hand hovered briefly over the dog's head before resting there, a quiet acknowledgement of something he could not explain but had learned not to question. Noah remained still, outwardly unchanged, his gaze distant, his body unresponsive in ways that had become familiar, expected, accepted by everyone except the one creature who refused to accept anything at all. Rex watched him with a focus that did not waver, not even when footsteps echoed in the hallway, not even when voices rose and fell, not even when food was placed nearby and left untouched until Daniel gently insisted, and even then, the dog ate quickly, efficiently, as if nourishment was a task to be completed before returning to something more important. Time moved forward in quiet increments, marked not by progress, but by presence, by the steady repetition of a dog who stayed when nothing changed, who returned when there was no sign that his staying mattered, who lay beside a boy who did not look at him, did not speak to him, did not reach for him, and still he remained. On the fifth day, something small happened, so small that it might have been missed if not for the way the room had learned to pay attention to the slightest shift, the slightest possibility that something could break the stillness that had held for so long. It was late afternoon, the light softer now, slipping through the blinds in thin golden lines that stretched across the bed, across Noah's hand, across the place where Rex rested his head just inches away, waiting as he always did, breathing slow, steady, present. Daniel stood near the window, arms folded, watching without appearing to watch, because he had learned that some moments disappear when you look at them too directly, and the nurse at the doorway paused mid-step, her hand still on the chart, her eyes drawn not by sound, but by something quieter, something that shifted in the air itself. Rex moved first, but not in the way he had before, not with a change of position or a lift of his head, but with something gentler, something intentional. He leaned in, just slightly, until his muzzle brushed against Noah's fingers, not a push, not a nudge, just contact, soft and deliberate, a connection offered without force. For a second, nothing happened. The same silence, the same stillness, the same distance that had defined every moment since the accident. And then, almost imperceptible, almost imagined, Noah's finger twitched. It was not a full movement, not a gesture, not something that would be called progress in any official sense, but it was there, a flicker, a response, a break in the pattern that had held for 42 days. The nurse inhaled sharply, then stopped herself, as if even breath could interrupt what was unfolding, and Daniel straightened, just slightly, his eyes narrowing not in doubt, but in focus, in recognition of something he had seen before in different forms, in places where survival depended on noticing the smallest change before it became something larger. Rex did not react with excitement, did not bark or move away. He simply stayed, his head still resting lightly against Noah's hand, as if he had been waiting for that moment all along, as if this was not a surprise but a confirmation. Another second passed, then another, and the finger moved again, this time slightly more, a faint curl, a response that traveled not through strength, but through connection, and Noah's eyes shifted, just enough to break from their distant focus, just enough to register something closer, something real. No words followed, no sudden change, no dramatic transformation, just a small, undeniable sign that something inside him had answered, something that had been quiet for too long but had not disappeared. Daniel let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding, his hand tightening briefly at his side before relaxing, and the nurse stepped back, her expression softening into something she had not allowed herself to feel in this room for weeks, something that looked a lot like hope, fragile, careful, but present. Rex remained exactly where he was, unmoving, steady, as if he understood that the moment did not need celebration, it needed space, it needed patience, it needed the same quiet presence that had brought it into existence. And in that stillness, in that fragile shift between nothing and something, the room felt different again, not because everything had changed, but because something finally had. The next morning did not arrive with celebration. It arrived the way all mornings had in that room, quiet, pale, carrying the same soft hum of machines and the same careful footsteps in the hallway. But something beneath it had shifted, something no one said out loud because they were afraid of breaking it. Like speaking too loudly might undo what had begun. Noah lay where he always did, his body still, his gaze not quite as distant as before, though no one could say exactly why, and beside him, Rex was already there, as if he had never left. His body curved slightly toward the boy, his head resting close, not touching, just near enough to be felt. Daniel stood at the foot of the bed, hands loosely at his sides, watching with the kind of attention that does not look intense, but misses nothing. The same attention he had carried through years of service, the same quiet awareness that had taught him to trust moments others might overlook. And when Noah's fingers shifted again, small and uncertain but real, Daniel did not move, did not speak. He simply let it happen, because he understood something the room was only beginning to learn, that forcing a miracle can make it disappear. The therapist arrived shortly after, clipboard in hand, her expression professional but softened by what she had heard the day before. A report passed quietly between staff, not announced, not exaggerated, just noted, because hope in a place like this is handled carefully, like glass that has already cracked once. She approached slowly, kneeling beside the bed, her voice gentle. "Good morning, Noah," she said, as she always did, though this time there was something different in the way she waited after speaking, as if expecting an answer that might not come. Rex lifted his head slightly, watching her, not with suspicion, but with that same steady awareness, as if measuring the moment, and when she reached toward Noah's hand, guiding it carefully, asking him to try, to focus, to respond, the room held its breath again, not because they expected something, but because they had seen something already and could not unsee it. Noah's fingers trembled, barely, a movement so small it might have been dismissed on any other day, but not now, not after what had happened, and the therapist leaned closer, her voice soft but firm. "That's it, Noah, just like that, stay with me." And for the first time since he had been brought into this room, Noah's eyes shifted toward a voice, not fully, not completely, but enough to show that something inside him was listening. Rex moved then, not away, not interfering, but closer, his shoulder brushing lightly against the side of the bed, his presence steady, grounding, and there was something about that contact, something subtle but undeniable, that seemed to anchor the moment, to give it weight, to keep it from slipping away. Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing just enough for him to feel it, and he glanced down at his right arm, at the faded outline of the dog tattooed there, a reminder of another bond, another life saved in a way no one had planned, and he shook his head slightly, almost to himself, because even now, even after everything he had seen, moments like this still found a way to surprise him. The session continued, not dramatically, not with sudden breakthroughs or visible transformation, but with small, careful steps, a finger that moved again, a hand that responded just a fraction more, a gaze that lingered a second longer than before, and each of these moments, though quiet, though easy to miss, carried a weight that filled the room in ways no one had expected. Noah's mother stood in the corner, her hands no longer clenched as tightly, her eyes watching every movement with a fragile kind of belief she had not allowed herself to feel in weeks. And when Noah's fingers curled again, slightly stronger this time, she covered her mouth, not to hide emotion, but to hold it in, to keep it from spilling out too soon, too loudly, before it had time to settle into something real. Rex remained where he was, calm, present, his breathing slow, his eyes never leaving Noah, and it became clear to everyone watching that whatever was happening here was not guided by commands or routines. It was something quieter, something deeper, something built on presence rather than action. As the therapist finished, stepping back with a careful nod, she glanced at Daniel, her voice low, almost reverent. "I have not seen a response like that this early," she said, not as a statement of fact, but as an acknowledgement of something she could not fully explain, and Daniel gave a small nod in return, not offering an answer, because he did not have one. Only a quiet understanding that some things do not need to be explained to be real. The room settled again into its familiar stillness, but it was no longer the same stillness as before. It carried something within it now, something that lingered in the air, something that stayed even after the therapist left, even after the hallway returned to its usual rhythm, something that remained in the quiet space between a boy and a dog who refused to give up on him. And for the first time, that space did not feel empty. Days no longer passed the way they used to, measured in hours or routines, or the steady ticking of a clock that no one noticed. They were now measured in moments, in small changes that carried more weight than anything that had come before. And the room seemed to understand that, holding each moment a little longer, letting it settle before allowing the next to arrive. Noah's hand moved again that afternoon, not by accident, not by reflex, but with a faint intention that could be felt even if it could not yet be explained, his fingers curling slightly against the blanket as if remembering something they had forgotten, and Rex was there, as he always was, close enough that the warmth of him reached Noah before anything else did. Daniel noticed it before anyone spoke, the subtle shift in tension, the way Noah's gaze no longer drifted as far, the way it paused, just briefly, when Rex adjusted his position, and it was that pause that mattered, that small interruption in distance that signaled something deeper beginning to wake. "Stay with it," Daniel said quietly, not to command, but to encourage, though he was not sure if the words were meant for the boy or the dog or something in between. The therapist returned with renewed focus, her movements more deliberate now, guided not by routine but by possibility, and she positioned Noah's hand carefully, asking him again to try, to respond, to reach. But this time there was something different in the air, something that made the request feel less like an instruction and more like an invitation. Noah's fingers trembled, then pressed slightly into the fabric beneath them, a movement small enough to miss if you blinked, but undeniable to those who had been watching closely, and his breathing changed, just a little, as if effort had found its way back into his body. Rex leaned closer, his shoulder brushing the edge of the bed, his presence steady and unwavering. And when Noah's hand shifted again, the dog did something he had not done before. He lifted his paw and placed it gently against the boy's wrist, not pressing, not guiding, just resting there, a quiet connection that seemed to anchor the movement, to give it direction without force. The room held still, no one speaking, no one moving. because something about that contact felt sacred in a way that could not be interrupted, and Noah's fingers responded, curling slightly more, pressing faintly against the weight of Rex's paw, as if recognizing it, as if understanding it without needing to see it. His eyes shifted again, this time more clearly, moving from the distant place they had lived for weeks towards something closer, something real, and for a brief moment, they landed on Rex. It was not a full focus, not a sustained gaze, but it was enough to break through the distance that had defined him, enough to show that he was still there, still present beneath everything that had changed. His mother stepped forward without realizing she had moved, her hand hovering near his shoulder, afraid to touch, afraid to interrupt, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Noah," she said, and for the first time, there was a response, not in words, not yet, but in the smallest shift of expression, a softening around the eyes, a flicker of something that had been gone for too long. Daniel turned slightly, his jaw tightening for just a second before he looked away, giving the moment space, because he understood that some things need to unfold without being watched too closely, that too much attention can turn something fragile into something that retreats again. The therapist nodded slowly, her voice steady but carrying a weight she did not try to hide. "That is voluntary," she said, more to herself than to anyone else, as if naming it made it real, as if speaking it anchored it in a way that could not be undone. Rex remained exactly where he was, his paw still resting lightly against Noah's wrist, his breathing calm, his eyes steady, and it became clear to everyone in the room that this was not coincidence, not chance, but something built over time, something formed in silence and patience, and a refusal to leave when nothing seemed to change. Noah's hand moved again, slightly stronger this time, pressing against Rex's paw with a faint but deliberate effort, and the movement traveled up his arm, small but real, a signal carried through pathways that had been quiet for too long, and though it was only a fraction, only an inch, it felt like miles. The room seemed to exhale together, not in relief, not yet, but in recognition, in the quiet understanding that something had begun that could not be undone, and Noah's eyes remained closer now, no longer lost in the distance, no longer unreachable, but here, present, connected to something that had chosen to stay when everything else had felt like it was slipping away. Rex lowered his head slightly, resting it near Noah's hand once more, not claiming the moment, not reacting to it, just remaining, as he always had, steady and patient, as if he knew that this was only the beginning, that what mattered was not the size of the step, but the fact that it had been taken at all. Progress does not move in straight lines. It bends, it pauses, it retreats just when you begin to believe it will continue. And that is the part no one prepares you for, not the doctors, not the charts, not the quiet optimism that had begun to fill the room in the days before, because hope, once it appears, brings with it something heavier, the fear of losing it again. Noah felt that before anyone else did. Even if he could not explain it, even if he could not put it into words, it lived in the way his fingers hesitated now, in the way his eyes sometimes drifted back to that distant place when effort became too much, when the small movements that once felt like victories began to feel like mountains he was not sure he could climb. The therapist noticed at first, the slight resistance, the pauses between attempts growing longer, the way Noah's hand would respond once, then fall still again, as if unsure whether it was worth trying a second time, and she adjusted her voice, softer now, less directive, more patient. "It is okay," she said gently. "You do not have to rush, but even patience has its limits when doubt begins to settle in." Rex noticed it too, not in the way humans do, not through observation or analysis, but through presence, through the subtle shift in energy that passed between them, the way Noah's breathing changed, the way his body seemed to pull inward rather than reach outward, and the dog responded the only way he knew how, by staying closer, by leaning in just enough to remind without demanding. Daniel stood near the doorway that afternoon, his posture relaxed but his attention sharp, watching the small struggle unfold in silence, because he recognized it, not the injury, not the specifics, but the moment when the fight becomes internal, when the body is no longer the only thing resisting, when the mind begins to question whether effort will lead anywhere at all. "You are not done yet," he said quietly, not raising his voice, not stepping forward, just letting the words settle into the room, into the space between Noah and the dog, into whatever part of the boy was still listening. Noah's fingers twitched once, then stilled, and his eyes shifted slightly away, as if retreating from something that felt too uncertain, too fragile to trust. And for a moment, the room felt like it had slipped backward, like the distance that had been closing was opening again. Rex did not allow that distance to grow. He moved slowly, deliberately, lifting his head and placing it gently against Noah's forearm, the weight of it warm, steady, undeniable, not heavy enough to force, but present enough to be felt. And when Noah did not respond immediately, Rex did something different, something no one had seen him do before. He exhaled slowly, a soft breath that brushed against Noah's skin, warm and rhythmic, like a quiet reminder that something was still there, still close, still waiting. Seconds passed, then longer, and Daniel's hand tightened slightly at his side, not in frustration, but in recognition of the moment, because this was the part that mattered, the part where everything could either continue forward or fall back into silence. "Stay with him," Daniel murmured, though he was not sure if he was speaking to the dog or to the boy. And Rex remained exactly where he was, unmoving, unyielding in the quietest way possible. Noah's fingers trembled again, faint at first, then slightly stronger, as if responding not to instruction, not to effort, but to presence, to the simple fact that something had not left him when he pulled away, and slowly, almost reluctantly, his hand pressed forward, meeting the warmth beneath it. It was not smooth, not controlled, but it was real, a small push against Rex's fur, a movement that carried more meaning than strength, and his eyes shifted again, not fully, but enough to break from that distant place, enough to return to something closer, something immediate. His lips parted slightly, not forming words, not yet, but carrying the shape of something that might become sound. And his mother stepped forward instinctively, her breath catching, her hands trembling just enough to show what she had been holding back. "It is okay," she whispered, echoing the therapist without realizing it. "You are okay." The therapist nodded slowly, her voice steady but filled with quiet conviction. "That is engagement," she said, again more to herself than to anyone else, as if each word anchored the moment further into reality. And Daniel exhaled, the tension easing just enough for him to feel it, his gaze lowering briefly before returning to the boy. Rex did not celebrate, did not move away, did not break the connection he had built piece by piece, day by day, through nothing more than staying. And in that stillness, in that quiet persistence, the room found its balance again, not in certainty, but in something just as powerful, the understanding that progress does not require perfection. It only requires that something, no matter how small, chooses to continue. The first time they tried to help him stand, no one said the word out loud, not the therapist, not his mother, not even Daniel, because the word carried too much weight, too much expectation, and in a room where progress had come in inches, in tremors, in breaths, the idea of standing felt almost too large to hold. The parallel bars were adjusted quietly, the metal cool and steady beneath the soft hospital light, positioned at just the right height for a boy who had not used his legs in weeks. And Noah sat at the edge of the bed, his body supported, his hands resting lightly where Rex had been moments before, as if the memory of that contact still lingered there. Rex stood close, not in front, not behind, but just to the side, where Noah could feel him without needing to look, his presence calm, anchored, as if he understood that this moment was not about movement alone, it was about trust. "We are going to try something new," the therapist said gently, her voice steady, careful not to rush the space they had built. And Noah's eyes shifted slightly, not fully meeting hers, but not drifting away either, caught somewhere in between fear and something quieter, something that had begun to grow without him noticing. His mother stood a few feet back, her hands pressed together, not in prayer, but in hope that looked very much like it, her breath shallow, as if even breathing too loudly might break what was about to happen. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed loosely, his gaze fixed but softened, because he knew this moment, not this exact one, but the kind that asks more from a person than they believe they can give, the kind that does not announce itself as important until it is already happening. "You do not have to stand all the way," the therapist continued, her tone grounding. Just lean forward, just shift your weight. We will be right here. And she placed her hands carefully, guiding but not forcing, supporting but not carrying, leaving space for Noah to choose. For a moment, nothing happened. The same hesitation, the same pause that had marked every attempt before, and Noah's fingers tightened slightly against the bar, his breath catching just enough to be heard in the quiet. And then Rex moved. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but with intention, stepping forward until his shoulder pressed gently against Noah's leg, a point of contact that did not push, did not demand, but offered something steady to lean into. Daniel noticed the shift immediately, the way Rex positioned himself, the way his body aligned just enough to support without interfering, and a faint breath escaped him, almost a laugh, almost disbelief. He has done this before, Daniel murmured under his breath, not to anyone in particular, because he knew the dog was not following commands, he was following something deeper. Noah's body responded slowly, his upper body leaning forward just a fraction, his arms trembling under the unfamiliar strain, and for a second, it seemed like that was all it would be, just another small attempt, another moment that would pass without change. But then his legs, quiet for so long, engaged, not fully, not strongly, but enough to shift his weight, enough to lift him just slightly from the edge of the bed. The therapist's voice softened further. That is it. Noah, stay with it. You are doing it. And his mother covered her mouth again, her eyes wide, not from shock, but from the fragile recognition that something impossible was unfolding in front of her. Rex did not move away, did not step back. He remained exactly where he was, his shoulders steady against Noah's leg, his body a quiet anchor, and Noah leaned into that, not consciously, not with full understanding, but with instinct, with the same part of him that had begun to respond days earlier, the part that had not disappeared, only waited. His legs trembled, the effort uneven, uncertain, and for a moment, it looked like he might fall back, like the attempt would collapse under its own weight, and Daniel straightened slightly, his body reacting before his mind, ready to step forward if needed. But Rex held position, unmoving, unwavering, and Noah adjusted. Just enough, just a shift, just a breath. And then he was upright, not fully standing, not steady, but no longer sitting, suspended in that space between what was and what might be. The room seemed to stop, not because of silence, but because of presence, because everyone in it understood that this was not just a movement. It was a crossing, a step from one reality into another, fragile and incomplete, but real. Noah's eyes lifted slightly, not toward the therapist, not toward his mother, but downward, toward the place where Rex stood beside him. And though his gaze was still soft, still unfocused, there was something in it now, something that had not been there before, recognition, connection, a quiet awareness of the presence that had not left him even when he had pulled away. You are standing, his mother whispered, her voice breaking in a way she did not try to hide, and Noah's lips parted again, just slightly, as if the words existed somewhere inside him but had not yet found their way out. The moment did not last long, his strength not yet enough to hold it, and slowly, carefully, he lowered back down, guided, supported, but the difference was already there, written into the room, into the way everyone breathed, into the way the silence no longer felt empty, but full of something waiting to grow. Rex stepped back only when Noah was settled again, his head lowering slightly, his body relaxing as if the work had been done, not completed, but begun, and Daniel looked at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable but softened by something deeper than pride, something closer to respect, because he understood now, more clearly than before, that this was not about training, not about commands, but about a kind of loyalty that does not measure success in distance or speed, only in staying, until the impossible becomes something that can be touched, even if only for a second. The days that followed did not rush forward. They unfolded slowly, carefully, like something fragile learning how to exist without breaking, and the room adjusted to that rhythm, no longer waiting for sudden change, no longer measuring progress in dramatic moments, but in the quiet accumulation of small, undeniable truths. Noah stood again the next day, and the day after that, not for long, not without trembling, but long enough to remember what it felt like to be upright, long enough for his body to begin recognizing a language it had nearly forgotten, and each time, Rex was there, never ahead, never behind, always beside, a steady presence that did not lead but did not leave. The therapists changed their approach without saying it out loud. Their voices softer now, their expectations less rigid, as if they had learned that something deeper was guiding this process, something that could not be forced or rushed. And Noah responded in ways that were still small, still uncertain, but consistent, his fingers stronger, his arms steadier, his gaze no longer drifting as far or as often. His mother began to speak more again, not filling silence the way she had before, but sharing moments, memories, small stories from home. And sometimes, when her voice carried a familiar tone, Noah's eyes would shift toward her, not fully, not completely, but enough to show that he was listening, that something inside him was beginning to return piece by piece. Daniel remained mostly quiet, watching from the edges, his presence constant but unobtrusive, because he understood that this was not his moment to lead, only to witness. And yet there were times when his voice entered the space, low and steady, offering something simple, something grounding, one step at a time. He would say, not as instruction, but as truth. Rex adapted without being taught, without being asked, adjusting his position as Noah's strength grew, sometimes stepping slightly ahead, just enough to give Noah something to move toward, sometimes staying close, offering balance without contact. And there was an awareness in him that went beyond training, a sensitivity to timing, to hesitation, to effort, that made his presence feel less like assistance and more like understanding. One afternoon, the therapist placed Noah between the parallel bars again, her hands ready but lighter now, trusting more, and Noah leaned forward with less hesitation than before, his arms holding more of his weight, his legs engaging with a faint but growing strength, and Rex stepped just ahead this time, turning his head slightly, his eyes meeting Noah's in a way that felt intentional, inviting rather than demanding. Noah's breath caught, not in fear, but in focus, and his right foot shifted, just a fraction, sliding forward along the floor, not lifted, not controlled, but moved, and that movement, though small, carried a different kind of meaning. It was not just response, it was attempt. That is it, the therapist said softly, her voice steady but filled with something she could no longer hide. Keep going. And Noah's left foot followed, uneven, uncertain, but forward, and the space between where he had been and where he stood now grew by inches that felt like miles. His mother stepped closer, tears in her eyes but not falling, because she had learned to hold them until the moment was complete, until it had settled into something real. And Daniel turned slightly, his gaze lowering for a brief second, his hand brushing unconsciously against the tattoo on his right arm, as if grounding himself in something familiar while witnessing something new. Rex moved slowly, matching Noah's pace, never pulling ahead, never falling back, his body aligned with each step, his presence constant. And when Noah faltered, when his leg hesitated, Rex paused, waiting, not urging, not correcting, simply allowing the moment to exist without pressure. And Noah adjusted, his body finding balance again, his movement continuing, fragile but real. The room seemed to breathe with him, each step echoing softly against the floor, each movement carrying a weight that filled the silence with something deeper than sound. And when Noah finally stopped, his body tiring, his strength not yet enough to go further, he did not collapse back into stillness. He remained upright for a second longer, just long enough to feel it, to recognize it, to understand that something had changed. He looked down, his gaze settling on Rex, and though his expression was still quiet, still soft, there was something new there, something that had not been present before, a flicker of awareness, of connection, of gratitude that did not need words to exist. Rex lowered his head slightly, his posture relaxed, as if acknowledging the moment without claiming it, and Noah's hand lifted, slowly, uncertainly, but intentionally, reaching toward the dog, not guided, not placed, but chosen. And when his fingers brushed against Rex's fur, the contact was light, fleeting, but unmistakably his. No one spoke, no one moved, because some moments do not need acknowledgement, they need space. And in that quiet, in that fragile connection, something settled into place, not as a conclusion, not as an ending, but as a beginning that had finally found its way into the light. Morning light no longer felt like something that passed through the room unnoticed. It settled now, warm and quiet, stretching across the floor, across the bed, across the space where a boy who had once been unreachable now sat with his feet resting lightly against the ground, not fully steady, not fully strong, but present in a way that could not be taken away. Noah's progress did not transform him overnight. It shaped him slowly, carefully, each day adding something small, something real, until those small things became something larger than anyone had expected. And though he still moved with effort, still paused between steps, still needed the steady support of the bars or the quiet presence beside him, he was no longer defined by stillness. Rex remained constant, unchanged in the way that mattered most, never seeking attention, never reacting to praise, always returning to the same place beside Noah, as if it were the only place he was meant to be. And Daniel watched this with a quiet understanding that settled deeper each day. Because he had seen loyalty before, he had lived alongside it. But this was something else, something softer, something that did not demand recognition, yet carried more weight than any command ever could. The therapist spoke differently now, not in cautious tones, but with a quiet confidence that grew from what they had witnessed. Their words no longer centered on limitations, but on what was possible, what could continue, what could build from what had already begun. And Noah responded to that in ways that felt natural, his movements more deliberate, his focus stronger, his eyes no longer searching for distance but settling into the present, into the moment, into the space where he was no longer alone. His mother no longer stood at the edges of the room. She moved closer now, her hands no longer clenched, her voice no longer fragile, but steady, filled with something she had almost forgotten how to hold. And when Noah looked at her, really looked, not just passing, not just shifting, but seeing, she smiled in a way that carried both relief and disbelief, because some moments arrive so quietly that you do not realize how much they matter until they are already happening. One afternoon, the therapist stepped back entirely, her hands no longer needed, her presence still there but no longer guiding, and Noah stood between the bars, his posture imperfect but upright, his breath steady, his focus fixed not on the floor, not on his own effort, but forward, toward the one constant that had never changed. And Rex stood there, just ahead, not moving, not calling, simply waiting. "Take your time," Daniel said softly from behind, his voice low, grounding, and Noah shifted his weight, his foot lifting slightly from the ground, not dragged, not forced, but lifted, a movement small in distance but vast in meaning. And when it came down, it did so with intention, with control, with the quiet certainty of something that had been earned rather than given. The second step followed, then a third, uneven but real, and the room seemed to fade around him, not disappearing, but softening, as if the moment belonged only to him and the quiet presence that had carried him to it. Rex moved only when Noah did, matching each step with careful precision, never ahead, never behind, always beside. And when Noah reached the end of the bars, his strength nearly spent, he did not collapse. He paused, standing there for just a second longer, holding the moment as if it might slip away if he did not. His eyes lowered, finding Rex again, and this time, there was no distance in them, no hesitation, only a quiet clarity, a recognition that did not need explanation, and his hand lifted once more, slower now, steadier, reaching down until it rested against the dog's head, his fingers pressing gently into the fur, as if confirming something that had always been true but had taken time to understand. No one spoke, not the therapist, not his mother, not Daniel, because the moment did not need words, it did not need acknowledgement, it existed fully on its own, complete in a way that could not be measured or defined. Daniel looked away briefly, his hand brushing against the tattoo on his right arm, the outline of a dog etched into his skin, a reminder of another bond, another life shaped by something that did not leave. And when he looked back, his expression had softened, not with pride, not with victory, but with something quieter, something closer to peace. Rex remained still beneath Noah's hand, his eyes calm, his body relaxed, as if the moment did not belong to him, as if he had only done what he was meant to do, nothing more, nothing less. And in that stillness, In that quiet space between effort and grace, it became clear to everyone in the room that what had happened here was not something that could be explained in terms of medicine or training or chance. It was something simpler, something deeper, something that had been built one day at a time, one moment at a time, by a presence that refused to leave until the impossible no longer felt so far away, and even then, stayed anyway.